Welcome to Shidduch U, Shidduch University from Adai Ad. Shidduchim. Everyone's experience is unique and there are no rules. People have lots of questions and concern. And that's why Adai Ad created Shidduch U, to provide you guidance and support through the Shidduch journey, through our posts, our podcasts, and our coaching. You can access our resources and the podcast at adaiad.org. That's ADAIAD.org. I'm your host, Devora Krasnianski from Adai Ad, and today's episode is about building the relationship during dating. And I spoke to Dr. Avigail Margolis about this very important topic. Of course, dating is about learning about the other person and sharing about yourself so you can both see if you'd be good partners in marriage. Dating is also about building the relationship, and that's what we spoke about. What builds the relationship, how to do that within the traditional Shidduch system. We also spoke about conversations to have and how to have those. We talked about alcohol on dates and the importance of having some experiences together beyond the conversations in a lounge. Here's the episode. Hello all, I'm Devora Krasnianski from Adai Ad, and tonight we have a very important topic about building relationship during dating. And firstly, I want to thank Ruchama Klapman from Mask for being part of this project. So Ruchama, can we talk a little bit about what Mask does, and then we'll just jump right into the topic.
Thank you, Devora. Thank you, Dr. Margolis, for joining us and collaborating with us. Mask, Mothers and Fathers Alliance Saving Kids. We're an organization. We are starting our 26th year today, our anniversary. And yes, Mask is a referral organization for all mental health, including addiction. We offer referrals for therapists around the world, inpatient, outpatient programs. We have a yeshiva liaison available if somebody needs school, you need programs, you need a psychiatrist, therapist, whatever referral you may need, we can hook you up. And we have a radio show Thursday nights, 9 p.m. on the Zeb Brenner station, which is 6:20 a.m. on the radio dial, and talklinecommunications.com. You could see all our programs on our website, maskparents.org. Thank you again, Devora and Adai Ad.
All right, thank you, Ruchama. Just want to send out your hotline number or your...
Yes, 718-758-0400, 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. We have parent support groups as well by Zoom.
All right, thank you, Ruchama. Thank you, Mask, for collaborating with us on this important project of Shidduch U University. Today we have Dr. Avigail Margolis to talk about building relationship during dating, and it's such an important topic because it's not only dating to find out information, it's really about the relationship. So, but before we get into the topic, can you talk a little bit about the work that you do in general and in relationships specifically?
Sure. Hi. Thank you for having me. So I primarily work with young adults in Brooklyn, in the Midwood area of Brooklyn, and I do some Zoom work as well. And a lot of the work that I end up doing, I didn't go into the field to specialize in this, is working with a lot of young men and women, specifically around dating, finding partnership, working on themselves, working on relationships. I also do couples therapy, so I see what happens after the wedding or until some years out. And I do a variety of work on anxiety, trauma, OCD, things like that.
So I'm really excited to be talking to you because you have a lot of experience in the dating and, like you said, on the relationship side of it. And sometimes it's because the dating didn't get started on such a strong the marriage. So I think there's a lot to talk about from the dating aspect. So I'm really excited. So we call this topic building the relationship. And we know that dating is, of course, a lot about finding out about each other and sharing about yourself, which is separate from finding out about the other. Now, I want to focus a little bit more on the aspect about building the relationship. So why is the building the relationship so important in addition to finding out about each other?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about dating, we're usually thinking about things to look out for, right? Like information you want to find out. We do so much of that even before we go on our first date. So you actually walk into a first date knowing so much information, things that you might find out if you met someone spontaneously a couple of weeks into a relationship, even a friendship, you know, how many siblings they have or where they went to school, things like that. You know that before you even meet them. It's kind of weird, kind of know like a lot of their life story before you even meet face to face.
Right.
The importance of building a relationship is actually, it kind of falls on a couple of levels. I think on the one hand, when you're married, what matters is not necessarily like what school someone went to, right? Or like, do they align with this specific yeshiva or that specific yeshiva, or, you know, what type of music do they like? I mean, that's not really what brings couples to couples therapy usually. I guess if somebody really loves classical music and they blast it all the time in my house, it may end up in couples therapy, but probably not. You want to build a relationship because that is actually what carries a couple from dating, married, like under the chuppah, to hopefully like raising a family together. And, you know, marital satisfaction is actually, it's kind of like a U shape. And so usually when we get married, we're actually at the height of like a relationship satisfaction. Usually when you're getting married, you're excited. It's a lot of hope and we're in love. And then it kind of like slowly declines. The bottom of it is when you have young children, which is understandable, right? Time, resources, energy, people are building their career. So finances might be a little bit more difficult. And then if you kind of get over that hump, you do get to the golden years. We really want everybody to get to that side. I think the more solid a foundation is going into it, the stronger the roots are as we actually do go through bumps. Relationships are not about having a relationship with no conflict, a relationship with no disagreement, a relationship without any bumps in the road, right? That's not
possible.
Exactly. Somebody told me they never had a disagreement with their partner, I would be very curious, and I wouldn't necessarily think that was a good thing. I would wonder like who's constantly compromising, right? So we want to know that there's a foundation. We want to know how we communicate. How can we have difficult conversations? Can we have difficult conversations? And I think what's difficult is you can't use how you are in the dating to say this is how we're going to be forever, right? Because relationships are something that evolve. There are something that grow together. So I think what you're really looking for is, do we have the roots where we can build and grow a relationship? Do we see the relationship getting deeper and deeper and stronger and stronger? It doesn't mean that you have to only get engaged or married at the time that you have a really, really strong relationship, but do I see a progression from the beginning of dating to later on in the dating process? I think those are pieces that I want people to be thinking about as they're dating. And these are really tough conversations to have. So you might as well start having them early when everybody is putting their best foot forward, because I think the conversations are also a lot smoother.
Right, definitely. But on the other hand, people don't really know each other, and sometimes they're afraid that they're going to say something that's going to shake it all up. So on the one hand, it's smoother because we really don't have a lot of conflicts. On the other hand, they don't really know each other.
That's true, and it can be really scary. So I think that you have to obviously, you know, you shouldn't be disclosing like every single thing about you and all your vulnerabilities on a first date. I would think that's horrible dating advice. At the same time, I think slowly sharing and kind of like extending the vulnerability a little bit incrementally as the dates go on. Also, this is actually an information / relationship awareness. Like if I'm sharing something that's a little bit more personal, is that person able to hear that? Is that person able to validate it? Are they able to make me feel heard in that experience? That would be something that would strengthen a relationship. And at the same time, do they then not, oh, you shared something, now it's my turn, kind of like a tit for tat situation, but can they meet me in that vulnerability? Can they actually, because I've shared a part of myself that maybe was a little bit uncomfortable, can they also, and it doesn't have to be equal. Relationships do not have to be equal at any given moment in time. Relationships have to be equal over the course of a relationship. If you think of relationships as money in a bank, and you're constantly making deposits, ideally both of you are making deposits, small deposits over time, so that you have a lot of money in that bank and it can withstand a couple of withdrawals. But it doesn't have to be that because I invested $20, so I sent a good Shabbos text, or, you know, like said something really sweet to you, that now you must give me a compliment. But over time, are we both contributing to this relationship in a significant way?
What I'm also hearing is that these difficult conversations, by opening up and by talking about the harder parts or the more private parts about ourselves, can build that relationship. It's not only can they respond to me in a way that feels right for me, but I think that being vulnerable is an important part.
100%. Yes, it's important. And relationships are not only about vulnerability. Relationships are also about fun and play and connection. And a huge part of what develops a deep relationship, or what I would say maybe differentiates an intimate relationship. And I don't mean that necessarily romantic. It could be a deep friendship as well. But what differentiates a very close relationship to a run-of-the-mill friendship is that vulnerability, is that deep sharing. And you need a lot of things to share, right? You need to feel safe. You need to trust the other person. And also, it's a definitely work for the self. It's really, really scary to kind of go out there on a limb and I don't know, like, what if I fall? Like, is there that net to catch you? And the truth is, I think dating is incredibly challenging. I think we underestimate how hard it is. Everybody talks about how hard it is and how hard shidduchim are. I think when they talk about that, they mean something different than what I think of as difficult as a relationship therapist. I think what's really hard is showing up and sharing parts of yourself and potentially being really open and getting rejected. That's really, really painful, and that's really hard. And at the same time, if we don't do that and the dating is super surfacey, then what kind of relationship are we establishing? And then how do we know that this is a relationship that can be taken to the next level?
Right. So the idea of having those difficult conversations and having some sort of even a conflict. So in that conflict, you could either get closer or you can find out something that you don't want to be part of.
Right.
But to skip it because you don't want to bring up something that's uncomfortable, I think is a disservice to yourself and to the potential relationship.
Totally. And even relationships that are really solid, even relationships that have had a lot of work, right? Because most relationships need a lot of work. I would say all, I just tend not to use extreme language.
Right.
Right? Relationships need work, and even relationships that have time and energy and a lot of commitment and work invested in them, there can be a disagreement, and one person or both people kind of leave feeling icky in the most clinical sense now, right? Like, you don't feel good about it. That doesn't mean that the relationship is not really strong or that the relationship can't be really strong. The question is, do we come back to that conversation? And how do we come back to that conversation? You know, whenever I'm at a bridal shower, people always say, what's one marriage advice that you would write to the couple?
Right.
And I usually write one piece of advice that usually gets me in trouble with the mother-in-laws, I'll be honest. And I write, it's okay to go to sleep angry, which is so counter, right, to what the typical marriage advice is, which is never go to sleep angry. I think sometimes, depending on who you are, if you're in a state where you're not okay, talking about it ad nauseum is not actually going to resolve the conflict. Now you're just tired and more angry. So sometimes you actually really need a good night's sleep. And then you can say, hey, I was thinking about our conversation yesterday. I want to follow up on it. So obviously when you're dating, you're not living together. It's a little bit different. But let's say you end a date and it feels like you talked about something and it didn't go so smooth. So as much as that is information for you, and it really is, and you have to be thinking about that, what I'm curious about is actually what happens after that. Can the couple come together and say, you know, I was thinking about what we discussed last Wednesday, and I didn't feel really good when blah, 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 blah. That to me is more important than the first conversation, because relationships have ruptures. We have disagreements. We have times that we're going to be on different sides of the fence. What really defines a strong relationship is, can we repair? Can we come back together? So that's really what I would be looking for. And also, you don't know how to have a conversation with this person yet, right? So your first conversation where something comes up and it's kind of like that, like the first conflict, that first bump in the road, and it's uncomfortable and it's not necessarily resolved, because not everything can be wrapped up with a pretty little bow ever, and definitely not on one date in one conversation.
Right.
What happens after, right? So is each person in the couple willing to go out again, right? Some people are just like, you know, forget it, I'm done. It's easier. And if you know in your gut, your intuition, that this is not going to work for you, of course, I never push people to go on dates. If they think that this is not for them, I support that. Our young men and women are really smart. We trust them to get married. We should trust them to know if they can go out again or not. I should say that again, because I don't think people, you know, it's what we show more than what we tell, right? So yes, if we are saying you are an adult, you are ready to build this relationship, then if you say it's not for you, okay, I respect that tremendously. Also, are you willing to go out again and have that conversation? So many times I find that people stop dating exactly at the point where it would be a relationship transformation. I'm not saying necessarily that it would mean that this partnership could last and should last, right? I don't know that. What I want to see though is, how do these two people come back together? Can they resolve it? And even if it's not going to end up in marriage, I know our community is so focused on marriage. And of course, I understand if that's someone's ultimate goal, they don't want to waste their time just going out on dates. I genuinely believe that people are looking at the dating as a means to an end. And it is also an important process in and of itself. And what you can learn about yourself, about relationships, about connecting to other people, about relating to someone in a romantic partnership, even if this isn't your person necessarily. I know it's like a little problematic because we usually don't think about shidduch dating in that way. And I think it can be done in a very appropriate manner. I think that we are getting the skills to create a healthy marriage, even if it's not with this person.
Right. I also think on the other hand, again, you go back to that conversation, go back to a date and have a conversation, your no may be a little bit clearer also, and then you won't be thinking, maybe I dropped it too soon. So this no will be more real if it's going to be a no.
Yeah. I mean, again, I don't want to feed into this anxiety I think that a lot of people have with dating of like, did I let someone slip away, or did I make the wrong call, or, like what if? So I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that if there's a question mark, you really want to be able to say no and then talk yourself back with the reasoning, right? Like if you ever have a significant relationship with someone and you end it, it's really good to write down the reasons that you ended that relationship at the time, because 6 weeks later, 6 months later, wait, why did I end that relationship, right? So it's really good, I think, to write that down. The same way that when you go on an interview for a school or a job, you want to write down how you felt in that moment, right after you left, not when they offer you the position 2 weeks later. Memory gets a little bit fuzzy. But so I do agree with you that the no is more solid. I think that sometimes people kind of ruminate about, did I let someone slip away? And so I don't want people to like be hyper nervous about that and just go out. But yes, 100% with that caveat. Yes, I think that then the no is stronger. You have that real like core understanding, and you can really concretely explain to yourself why you said no.
Right.
Again, it's okay to say no from just a gut reason, but I think you might feel better if you can actually identify why.
Right. So I think that's what we're saying, is to go back into the conversation. There's so many benefits for it, so for the relationship or for the no, and for also for yourself, of the skills or the mindsets or just getting to know yourself in general. So there's a lot of benefits to it. And yes, you may be the one who's not sure, but the other person, that whole idea of, am I leading them on by going back into that date?
Right. So I don't believe in that. I think that dating is inherently selfish. I think that we both go into it like it's two mature adults going into this knowing that each of them are trying to figure it out. And I don't want people to have that pressure of, I don't want to go out again because I might be leading them on. Because as long as there is a possibility, which going out again means that there is a possibility, because even if you know that it's a no, by going out again, you are actually giving it that shot. And if you do go on a date, then ideally I would like you to have an open mind, because you are taking the other person's time. So I think be respectful. And like, this is what dating is. It's okay. I think that I want to give people permission. Like, it is okay. It is okay to date. It is okay to date if you're unsure. You do not have to worry about leading someone on. This is the work. I think this is what a date is. A date does not mean I definitely want to marry you. That's not what dating is.
It has a certain risk to it. I mean, just like anything.
Yeah. It only has a great risk because there's great rewards. So I think anything significant, it feels really scary, and there's a lot of weight put to it. And I value the fact that people are trying to be really respectful of the other person's feelings. I think it's coming from a beautiful place. I think we just have to be careful that it doesn't come too much so that it interferes with your ability to make sure and do what you feel is right, just because you don't want to lead someone on. It's a good point.
So we talked about having difficult conversations. So some people may think that a little alcohol could kind of make the conversation go. And we both have opinions about the alcohol, so go for it.
Okay, so the caveat is, I am all for an adult over 21 having an alcoholic beverage once in a while in a safe environment. So that's the caveat. Although I don't know if I'm allowed to say that if we're collaborating with Mask. I think that's okay, right?
I think so.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't think that Mask says everyone should be abstinent, right? I think alcohol is something that we need to be mindful of. I think alcohol is a tricky proposition because, first of all, it lowers inhibition. That's the point, right? I think that's what you're saying. Like, maybe it would be easier. First of all, if you're talking about building a relationship, You can't always take a drink when things get tough. It doesn't work. What if you're having a disagreement at 9 o'clock in the morning and you're watching your kids and you have work to do? It's not
Right.
the solution, right? So in general, I would love for people to have other strategies to regulate other than substances. That's one. And it's not always available. I think the reason that relationships get built when you're vulnerable is because you're vulnerable. I think inherently in being vulnerable, relationship gets built. If you're numb to it because you are on a substance, you're not actually doing it. Like when you're dancing, but you're not really dancing, like you're kind of like swaying,
Right.
not really dancing. So you're not actually in it. And I just want to pivot a little bit because I think something that came up is talking about alcohol early on in dating. Can I jump there, or do you want to talk?
Yeah, let's go for the whole thing in any order.
So I think a lot of people are going to bars or lounges early on in dating. And I understand why. It's easy, it's convenient, it's good for talking. I think some people are getting at least one, if not two alcoholic beverages. I am strongly against that early on in dating for a lot of reasons. First of all, I want to believe that everyone that you're going out on a date with is a super safe person. I really do. And I don't want to raise anybody's anxiety higher than it has to be when going on a first date. We do a lot of work on researching, and hopefully you're going out with really solid people. At the same time, we don't know who you're going out with. They are a stranger, man or woman. You're going out with someone that you don't know. And being under the influence when you're with someone you don't know is not the safest place to be. That's one. Two, what message are you telling yourself that you can only have these hard conversations if you use this aid of a substance? I think that later on in dating, you're out at a steakhouse, you want to have a glass of wine, I have no problem with that. But early on, and as a way to avoid the difficult conversation, I wouldn't recommend it.
So even though it's like you're in the typical place is the lounge, maybe because it's so easy,
Right.
but there are other places. And now I think that there are many people that do understand the non-alcoholic, even in the city, there are ways to sit down without an alcohol, without a drink.
Right. Yeah, I don't think anyone requires that. You can get a soda, you can get water.
Right.
There's a minimum, pay the minimum. So here's charge my card $40, but I don't necessarily need the drinks or get a mocktail or whatever, you know?
Right. And for some people, I know for some of the girls, the younger girls, besides that some of them are not even 21, but that's separate from that. They don't want to take the drink.
Mhm.
They're just not even used to drinking. So just be cognizant of all of that.
Yeah. And even if you have a high tolerance, let's say you're older, right? I think for sure, let's be mindful of underage drinking for sure. And definitely if somebody's not comfortable in general, right? And I know perm's coming up. We never want to pressure someone to drink, period. No matter what context it is.
Right.
But yeah, I think even if you have a high tolerance, like I don't love the idea that you have a drink or two for sure. No matter how high your tolerance is, it's affecting you. Otherwise you wouldn't be drinking. And so why are you drinking on a first date? But yes, I think the idea that these young women may not want to is another good point to put out there. I wonder if men who don't want to also and feel like they have to because of the culture also, you know.
Right. So the other thing is, on the one hand, we don't want the idea of drinking so that you can be able to share, but also when you're drinking, you may not be able to really take in all the cues that are there. So it's for that end also.
Right, it's dulling your senses, and you can't choose which senses it's dulling. You can't say, okay, I just want to be like calmer to share, but I want to be as perceptive. It doesn't really work that way, right?
And you may not even remember exactly what was said if you want to reflect later. So it's really come in there calm, however you can calm yourself. For some people, it's take a walk before, take a walk around the block or whatever it is, but the alcohol is not really the way. They can find other ways. Like you said, at 9 o'clock in the morning, the alcohol is not going to be available for you anyway, or shouldn't be an option.
Yeah, and I think there really are so many techniques and tools, you know, like I don't want to put on this hat because I do a lot of like CBT and DBT work. So I don't necessarily want to put on the skills hat here. There are so many resources available for things that you could do both before and during a date if you're very stressed out. I'll give just one tip, if that's okay, that I think people are trying to hit with the alcohol that really you can do on a date. Although for the women with makeup, it's going to be a little harder. But there's something called the dive reflex, which is when you plunge face forward in freezing cold water, your body kind of like pulls temperature and slows down and everything, right? So theoretically, if you would have just ice water, ice seltzer, and you put it right here by your cheeks and hold your breath, maybe when your date is in the bathroom, that should calm you down. Or in the bathroom, you could splash your face with cold water, holding your breath, leaning over, or even just holding a cold drink in your hands should really help kind of calm yourself down. You could take deep breaths. Like there are other ways to regulate. And you know what? It's okay if you're nervous to say to the person that you're out on a date with, I'm actually feeling really overwhelmed. Can we go outside for a walk to have this conversation? Driving, walking, these are really good times to have conversations because you're not face to face.
Right.
So there's something really nice about kind of walking parallel. And I think those are really good times to have a conversation, even if you're not necessarily driving, because I don't want you to have an upsetting conversation while someone's driving and them to be distracted. That could also be a problem. But even if, before we go in, can I actually ask you a question, or there's something I wanted to discuss? Like use the opportunities where you're not necessarily like just looking at each other directly, which could feel intense.
So I think that goes back to the idea of somewhat planning the dates. Like if you know you want to share something, what for you is the best setting? Or if you want to ask a question, the other one, what do you think is for them the best setting? For some people, it may be in the car. Like you said, not driving, because if the conversation goes really bad and you're like 4 miles away from where you have to be, it's a little bit harder to sit in the car. Like I can get out now, thank you. Like if you're just sitting there parked. So there's another point, especially, I'll just leave it at that. So, but pre-plan how you're going to bring it up. Also, you can plan like how much you want to share, like how much you want to drip of the information. Like you don't have to share it all. So,
and also role play, I think like plan it. If you have a good friend or a mentor or therapist that you're talking to already, a coach, then role play. Actually have the conversation with them, because you will be more effective when you're actually having the conversation. And if you don't have that, or you want to keep this private for whatever reason, do it in front of a mirror. Say out loud the conversation you're planning on having. It will actually make you feel more calm when you're having a conversation, and you'll be able to kind of refine it and process it as you're doing that.
so that's what I do as a coach, is when we do the role playing. I find that for people that have already rolled off the tongue once, it's like they have some experience with it, so that it makes it much easier for them. So that's part of, and also what I also help with the phrasing of it. For some people, they want to get it as best as possible. It's a hard conversation, so we can talk a little bit about what it is that you want to have from that conversation. So that's a way to pre-plan, especially for the difficult conversations, whether it's a conversation that you want to bring up something that you experienced, or something that you want to share about yourself. So both of those.
For sure. And I think something that's important to think about also, because we're talking about building a relationship, is ideally no one date, like, well, obviously some dates make or break it, obviously, right? And depending on what goes on. But also if you're thinking about dating as building a relationship with someone, if for whatever reason, like you had planned to bring something up and you start bringing it up and then you're kind of like, I don't feel ready or whatever, like you can always pause and then come back to it after you have time. Like if you're thinking about dating from a more like relationship perspective, then you can come back to these things, or you have the conversation and you don't think it went well, right? Like we said, you can always revisit, go deeper. Like you said, you want to figure out how much you want to share. Okay, so I'm ready to share this much, and then 2 weeks from now, maybe, how I shared that, I actually also want to add something else.
Especially when it's your own story, you know how much you can share at each time, because you lived it. It's your lived experience. So how much can I share, how to word it, what kind of information to bring along with that, whether it's a medical situation or whatever it is. It's your story. So you kind of know what to do with it. And the whole idea of, I think, that part of the relationship is seeing how they receive it, so that we'll also tune into that. So like, how do you feel as you're sharing it? How do you feel that they received it? How do you feel afterwards? And like tune into all of that, which again takes us back to our alcohol. Is like you can't really tune in and remember if there's too much alcohol.
Right. And I think that's really important, right? Using yourself as a good indicator. How do I feel when I'm sharing this? Now, some of that could be because of you and what you're bringing. There's definitely usually an interaction between me and the other person, and I'm feeling a certain way because of the dynamic between the two. They're just good to pay attention to. And you don't necessarily need to know what it means. You just want to pay attention to it, at least initially.
And I also found that some people are hoping that the other person will be so accepting. I'll just know that they accepted me. And it doesn't always work that way. And it doesn't mean that it's not a good relationship. It's just like, I don't know what to think about that, or I don't know what that means. And I have to process it. And their silence doesn't necessarily mean anything.
Yeah.
Not have your expectations when you're sharing something big. Like, just be in it.
100%, and give the other person the respect and the permission to take as much time as they need to process this, because you already knew what you were going to say, right? This wasn't new information for you, and it might be very shocking for them. Ideally, also, I think part of a relationship is sharing, this is information I need to marinate in, or I need to process it, or thank you for sharing Is it okay if I ask you questions? So there are kind of like these statements that the other person can share even when they're not ready. And I agree with you. Listen to that, pay attention to that, but you don't necessarily know what it means. Don't make assumptions, right? You don't know what the other person is thinking, and it's perfectly fair for them to need time to process what you shared with them and figure out what does that mean. You want to be accepted for the long term, but doesn't mean in that moment that they have to say everything is perfectly fine. You actually want someone to consider, how would this impact my life? Am I really okay with whatever that share is? Because you genuinely want them to actually be okay with it, not just to say that they are.
Right. And I think that's also important, is make sure that you know how they accept it. But not only that, I shared it. Like, there are some people that I said it. It was so hard for me. I said it. But do you know how they received it? Do you know that they received it? How do you know? Do they just shake their head and say, yes, okay? So it's not only just saying it.
It's a tall order, Devora, because, we're usually so flooded by the time that we're sharing that to also pay attention. I agree with you. And I think all the work that you do before, if you know you're sharing something, will really help you be more mindful and be calmer when you're sharing it so that you can take in that information. Otherwise, if you're kind of like at 100 and you're sharing, your brain is going to shut off. You're not actually going to be able to receive that information. So I think that all of the practice that you do before and the strategies that you're going to do to calm yourself down are going to be really important if you want to also be able to pay attention to, is it being received? How's the other person responding? What are the nonverbals that they're sharing?
And it's not, like you said, dating is difficult. It's not easy, but when you come out on the other side of it, the relationship is probably in a better place if you paid attention. Not, I hope that what that means is that he's accepting or she's accepting it, but really know it, and even ask them for them to repeat back, like, what did you hear? I'm not sure I was clear. I'm not sure I said it fully. What did you hear? I want to fill in any of the gaps. It's on us, the one who's sharing, to make sure that you're accepted. So don't like just say, did you hear me? Yes.
Right.
What's that even?
Exactly. And also give permission for them to ask questions. I think that's important too.
Okay, so I think we can move a little bit from that to, so how do we know that we are in a good relationship? Like, what are we really looking for besides this, the comfort? Sometimes there's just the two young people and they're having a good time, and that's that seems like a good relationship. So like, what else can they be doing to like see that it's a good relationship?
Yeah, so I think there, a lot of the foundation is already set before you go out, like we said, right? You know a lot of information early on. You want to be taking into account all the new information that you're learning and how would this apply to my life. Other than that, I think connecting and playfulness and togetherness and connection, those are really important. I said connection twice, but I want to know, like, how do I feel when I'm with the other person? It's not just comfortable, right? Comfortable is important. Also, like, do we have fun together? Can we kind of go in and out of serious and light, right? Is there like enough of a flow? Is it always really serious? Is it always really light? I like to think in general of like the middle path. So a balance, like can we sometimes be really silly together and laugh about something? And can we also have a serious conversation, not necessarily in the same minute, but if the relationship is really, really serious all the time, unless you're both very serious, intense people, and that's what you're looking for, I would be paying attention to that. If it's always light and goofy and we can never have serious conversations, I'd be thinking about that. You said two young people, right? So they're in this bubble. And I think that it's really beautiful. And a couple relationship is so unique in that usually like there's two, right? So it's two people together building a relationship and a special bond. I would love it if we could kind of expand that circle a little bit while we're dating to gather more information, see how the person that we're dating is in bigger groups, right? Because I think most people in our community plan on having families. Most people have large extended families, right? That we're going to be introducing our partners to and then integrating them into our family. So right. I think we want to know a couple of things of how they interact, like socially is what I would be thinking about. So I know that we're good one-on-one. We can connect, we can have fun, we can have serious conversations. I feel safe, our values are aligned. That's great. That's all great information. What's missing maybe when you're talking about two people is how do they show up in a social situation? How do they relate to other people, not just me?
Right.
You relate to people of their own gender, right? If I'm a woman, how do they relate with other guys, men? If I'm a guy, how does this person relate to their female friends or family? These are situations that I would want someone to be thinking about. And I know that might be a little bit tough to create within the Shidduch system. So I think first of all, we always talk about like, see how they treat the wait staff. And that's great. That's great information, especially because often the wait staff may be of a different background. And so we do want to know, like, is there general kavod habrios? Like, are they respectful of people in general, not just people who are like me or, in that space? And it's great. I just think that those interactions are so short. So unless someone does something either incredibly polite or incredibly egregious, it's pretty much going to be in the neutral space. I don't really know. I like to have conversations with everyone around me. So if you were on a date with me, I would be talking to the person in the elevator, things like that, which may freak you out. And that would be information, right? But most people are not doing that. So I think we want to be creative. How can I see this person in social situations? And that is a little bit tricky if you don't want to introduce them to friends and family, which I'm going to get to in a minute, because I want us to be introducing her
Right.
earlier on. That's my dream. I think, there are some types of dates where it's more likely that you will be interacting with other people. So there's this thing in downtown Brooklyn called axe throwing, which is typically like, up to 8 people in a lane. And usually you don't, even if you book it as 2 people, like there might be other people that join. So it's an hour and a half. People have weapons in their hands. So you really have to feel safe. But right, how do we interact with the people that we're doing axe throwing with? Are we cheering them on? Are we ignoring them? It doesn't mean anything. It's just information. It's just information for you to gather. There's this website called Meetups, which just has like a bunch of different activities. I know in the summer there's a lot more hiking and biking. And can we join a pre-existing group of people that we don't know? And how do those dynamics flow? How does that get?
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think things like that. I don't know how much information you're going to be getting other than how does this person relate to people he or she doesn't know, and in a group dynamic, what gets activated? Because often there's different things, different parts of our personality that get shown when we're one-on-one and when we're in a group. I think most of us resonate with that. Like I show up differently at a party than I do one-on-one. So and it's just information that you want to be taking into account. Most of the time you're going to be one-on-one, but we tend to do a lot of social things. We are a pretty like community focused community. So that I know that it's typical in my community for usually the first few dates for the man to pick up the woman from the woman's home. So sometimes like you have the opportunity for the parents to at least have like a 2-minute conversation. I think that's really valuable. I think that it's great if the man's parents would like to meet with the young woman once in a while. Like, I don't think it should be standard on like a first or second date. I think that would be very intense, but as the dating progresses, and I'm not going to give a number just because it's so individual, but I do think that the family of the man's side should also have an opportunity to meet with the young woman, mainly just because you want to see, I mean, I would assume for most people, their family of origin is an important part of their life. And how does this person integrate into my family? What's the vibe? And also, these people know me so well. Do they have feedback that I might have missed, I might not have seen, or even feedback about myself? Did you notice that when this person comes around, like you're actually much quieter than you normally are? Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay, I'm going to pay attention to that. It doesn't have to be this big, scary intervention. Like, we don't think you should marry this person. I think people get very overwhelmed and think that it has to be something massive. I think that it's just information from another pair of eyes, which I think is important. I want everyone to feel really confident and trusting their intuition and their gut. And I think it's really like doing this with one hand behind your back, not being able to see how they would integrate with your family, how they interact with strangers. I would love it if we could start introducing people who are dating.
I so see that. And especially if someone has a particular reason why they would want that, and they ask for that for whatever reason, then really consider it. It's not as if it's an absolute no, even though it's culturally not done. I think that, like you said, we should progress toward that. But if someone specifically asks for it, I think that there's room for that, for whatever reasons that people are asking, whether it's done from their family to begin with. That's just the way it's done. So yes, maybe in your small circle it's not done, but it's not like it's not done. Speak to your guidance or whatever, your mashpia or whatever, but there's a lot of merit to it.
I think so. And I think that, even if we don't want necessarily, you have to introduce them to your whole gaggle of friends, like all at once, I think that might be intimidating. Even though this is something that we keep pretty quiet, right? And we're pretty private about, and that's perfectly appropriate and acceptable. usually a sibling of yours knows that you're dating. A good friend of yours knows that you're dating, right? So it's already out there, right? And then they know you really well. And yeah, what feedback do they have for you? How does that person interact? If I could encourage people to try and
True.
the other person would be willing, I would love that. Who knows, in 20 years from now, people might be listening to this and being like, duh, we do that all the time. So maybe we're going to be the top.
Revolutionary. Yeah. I think it's so important. I find that there are interesting insights that people do come up with, or seeing how the two of them are together, like you said. I think there's a lot to be said. And that could be wonderful, or they could be reassuring also. It's not as if they're only looking for what's wrong.
100%. And I think you want to introduce them to somebody who is balanced, right? Who's going to give you feedback, both positive and negative, or be open. And you don't want to introduce them to your most critical friend. I think that would be a good guideline. Yeah. Also other settings, right? So like we talk a lot about like when you're dating, to also try to do something active once in a while, right? Not just talking and play a game and see if they're competitive and things like that, right? Like we talk about like shifting the setting, but also like, if we could spend like a Shabbos meal together. I know that might be hard just logistically before someone would be engaged, just because what if we live in different communities? What if we're far? It's not done, right? But like different dynamics come out in different spaces. At a Shabbos table, it might be very different than at, a restaurant for dinner. But realistically, most people, right, like we're having Shabbos once a week and we're having at least 2 Shabbos meals. It's going to be a big part of your life. And so I think the more spaces that we can see this person that we're dating in, obviously this would be like when you're dating seriously, right? But I say the more the merrier. And I only see it as a positive in pushing the relationship forward and setting the foundation and working things through earlier on rather than later.
I also, to add to that, I also see it as, for some people, they kind of gives them a sense of real life. Like we're going to the supermarket and we're buying a snack, or like you're going on a trip to Montreal, you would stop by 7-Eleven and buy something. So it just makes it feel like a little bit more real. And then see, do I feel like he could be in my life? Do I feel like she could be in my life? Or could I be in his life? Not that you're judging it, but just make it feel like it's a mini moment.
Yes, right. Dating is usually this bubble, right? And it happens in very specific times and specific like spaces. And that's not how life is. I think every couple ideally is going on date nights. Realistically, ask somebody who's married a long time how often they go on date nights. Hopefully it's somewhat regularly. If they say once a week, they're doing really well and I want to meet them. But no, right? But like realistically, like date nights are this special thing.
Right.
And that's beautiful and wonderful. And you want to know that you could be really good daters. And that's not majority of the time that you spend living with somebody and being married to someone and being in a deep, intense relationship with someone. So I think the more, do you know how this person is when they have a cold, right? Like, do you know how they act, right? Like, I wouldn't want someone to be like, oh, so assume we're going out for a few weeks, right? Okay, first date, second date, if you have a cold, yeah, you can cancel. But it's not like, oh, I have a cold, so let's not go out. I mean, don't contaminate someone else. Okay, but like, I want to know, how are you when you're tired? How are you when you're not feeling well? Because these come up.
It's real life. I mean, if someone's going to live 70, 80 years without getting a cold, like I want to, like you said, I want to meet that person. Right. What are they doing? Right. So, yeah. So I also think that the whole idea of meeting somebody or like having the conversation as opposed to someone cleaning up the conversations, like many times, like you said, having the cold or rescheduling or whatever it is. So sometimes it does go through the shadchan, and I think it's a missed opportunity that they could really have seen how much of a cold do they, or how busy they are, or how frustrated they are that the schedule isn't working. So if it goes through the shadchan, they kind of sanitize it, and I think it's a missed opportunity.
I agree completely. I kind of understand the role of a shadchan, think where it started from, and I think that in the beginning, it makes things a lot easier and smoother originally. At a certain point, I'm not sure, like people I think are relying on the shadchan to communicate for them rather than to do the conversation themselves and to do the relationship work. I think that it's important for you to have the conversation with the other person. I don't want to say raw and unfiltered, meaning obviously like be effective and think it through and be wise about it. But right, if somebody's saying something and this is their best foot forward and it's not really so appropriate or respectful of my time, like I want to know that. I don't want someone else to say it in a nicer way, because then I'm losing out on information. I'm not hearing that they are prioritizing their schedule over mine constantly, right?
Right.
Shadchan is telling me that. The Shadchan is just saying, oh, actually, I think this day is better, period.
Right.
So I think it is a lot of missed opportunities, and you have to feel comfortable with what you want to do about dropping the shadchan. At what point do you do that, or just like really using the shadchan to do the very basic things and asking the shadchan to be really like clear with you. Like I think there are a variety of ways to try to really work within the relationship, about the relationship, rather than other people kind of micromanaging the relationship for you. And I think, just to say, shadchanim do fantastic work in our community. I'm not a shadchan. I did it once. It was very, very hard. I just think, yes, in general, I don't want anybody speaking for someone else, not a therapist, not a coach, nobody. I think that
Right.
has to be within the relationship. And, you know, when you were talking about building the relationship earlier, you were talking about either I'm disclosing something or someone else is sharing something, right? Really, the relationships, the conversations that move a relationship forward is also talking about the relationship. And I think that's sometimes what gets lost when we use an intermediary, because they're kind of like figuring the things out about the relationship for us rather than us talking about it, you know, hashkafic differences or different value-based things like that. I think sometimes get kind of like, to use the word, cleaned up or filtered through the shadchan, and I think it is a missed opportunity. I would love for people to be able to engage in that dialogue for themselves, because I think it's actually so much more about the conversation, how we have it, and the meaning behind the conversation than the conversation itself. It's not about the facts, like, oh, I really want to have a ton of guests at my Shabbos table. How do you think about that? And if they say, no, actually, I always really wanted it to be just family, that's not, oh, our values are misaligned. It's, yeah, I also value family, right? But if all these conversations go through shadchan, you don't even have the opportunity to expand upon. It's like a yes or a no, and you're missing all the behind the scenes information.
Oh, all the chance also for the conversations. Like, what does that mean to you? You know, like how often, what does family mean to you? Because you could have a 5-minute Shabbos meal and that's not family either.
Right.
There's
No,
no guests and there's no family.
Exactly. I think that there's so much meaning behind it. There's so many pieces. I'm saying, exactly. I think when you're having a conversation, it's not really about like a checklist of yes or no. It's the reasoning behind it. Does this align? Can this match? Are we more in sync than not? And it's not necessarily like we're going to have 5 guests or we're going to have 15.
Right. But I think also like part of that conversation is, can I share my perspective and can they actually take in my perspective? Not that they have to, but is there any, do you see any of it in all of the dating that they take in or take influences, or just listen, or could I take theirs? Or is there ideas always stupid? Or, you know, think about that, you know, like, what does that mean? That you don't like their ideas, or is there something that talks about yourself? That's a whole different aspect. No, but can you take something? Can you take ideas from them? Do they have ideas that you respect?
Yeah. And can I really hear somebody's perspective and communicate that I understand it and value it without necessarily shifting like what I believe, right? Can I incorporate new information? Can I reflect that back to somebody? Can I sometimes shift? Can I hear that information and agree with them and still say, and this is still important to me? Like all of those information, I think again, this goes back to so much that we learned about ourselves. Like, am I as flexible as I thought I was? And the other person for sure, right? Because most people want the other person to be more flexible than they want to be flexible.
But I also think that when you have these kind of conversations, it's sort of like, when you have these differences, it's sort of like a conflict or a conversation on a silver platter. Here it is. Here's what you're going to talk about. Here's what you're going to figure out about each other. So I think it's a wonderful, like, don't hide it. Or like when the date doesn't go well, or when you go to a restaurant and it's closed.
Right.
I think, again, that's another silver platter. See how you're going to figure it out.
100%, right? I think that is more meaningful information, right? I mean, I think it's good to know how people respond in positive scenarios. And I think it's just as, if not more important, how do they respond when things are tough, right? Which we don't usually have, because dating is so, I don't want to say artificial, because it's not fake, because people are really showing up and trying to connect, but scripted, I guess, or
unnatural.
Constructed.
It is. And I think that when things become a little bit more natural, like when the place is locked or there's no seats left, and then that's become like more like real life, like on a regular Sunday afternoon when you finally have 2 hours to go out. Where do you want to go? I don't know. Where do you want to go? I don't know. And then now you can actually see how you play that out, and not only most of the time we're relying on the guy to figure out the dates, And besides that, it's not fair to the guy always have to figure out the dates. I think that there's again another missed opportunity to say like I'd rather go here, or I heard that there's about this new place. Can we try it out? Or we up here in Dutchess County, can we go to this place? Or actually just sit there and Google together, just like what you might do eventually in real life.
Right. And I think, obviously you don't want to come unprepared. You don't want to have, and it also depends on later on in the date. But first of all, I'm all for taking turns dating, like planning dates, not necessarily, again, 50-50 or 1-to-1. But I think if it's typical that the guy is always planning the dates, like I would love for the woman to offer to plan a date, or for the guy to ask her, like, how would you feel about planning a date, so that it's her input. And I love the idea of planning it together.
Or you can also make it sometimes just to say for the guy, make it easier for him to know where to take you. Because
Right.
otherwise you're going to ask his guy friends and you're going to go to guy friend places. But if you like something, then let him know. Don't like, and that's just advice for all of marriage. It's like, don't make him guess. Don't make her guess, but don't make him guess. You want what you want, just say it.
Yeah.
And you can practice that during dating too.
Correct. This is the whole, like, but if I ask for flowers, it doesn't mean as much, right? Eventually it doesn't matter. I think communicate what you want. And even if the first time you have in the back of your head, well, they're doing it because I told them, you smile and say thank you, and then they keep doing it and you appreciate it. So I think it is a very good pattern. Same way that early on in a marriage, when, I mean, this is so gendered, but usually when the guy offers to do the dishes, say yes. Okay. You always say yes. This is what I tell the women. Set up the relationship like from the get-go, early on. Yes, communicate what you want, and for both, right? For the guy or the woman, like either way is perfectly fair. And also, usually I think the onus is on the men, not just to plan the dates, but also to have the relationship conversations. Like, okay, like when, like, I'm gonna ask you for your number, I'm gonna say that like maybe we can proceed without the shadchan, or I'm gonna have a conversation with you about like where is this relationship going, or are we ready to get engaged, or things like that. And that's perfectly fine. I think that if a woman feels like they want to bring something up, it's perfectly appropriate for them too. They can bring that up. I think it's hard, right? Like we're putting so much responsibility on the men, and maybe a lot of pressure, but also I think women sometimes want to bring things up and they feel like they can't. So I think it's fair game once you're dating.
Totally.
One can bring these things up.
Totally. Like you can say whether you think the relationship is, or you don't know, you to the woman, or either of you,
Right.
either of you. And definitely, I don't think that it should come to the shot when the shotgun says, okay, she's ready for you to propose. I think he should have this sense.
Yeah.
He's going to get a yes, and he's going to get a yes this time. Like that, yes, but I really want to wait. Like you should be able to talk about we should have we conversation, talk about our l'chaim, our verts, or whatever it is. Like pick a date together, like
totally. And even concretely, like I think it can be a conversation, like, are we ready to get engaged, and when would be a good time? Obviously it doesn't have to be the exact day if you want to surprise someone, but timing in general, I think that's a perfectly appropriate conversation to actually have very clearly. I don't think you have to have a sense. I think it can be discussed, and it should be, ideally.
right.
This is how you make
Between the two of you.
between the two of, yes, the two people who are dating, yes. Not the
Right.
shot that she's ready to get engaged, or he's ready. And so much of that comes from pressure also, right? Like he's ready to get engaged. When will you be? Either way, I think it should be that the two people are discussing that conversation. And if for whatever reason they're struggling to, that's when they should seek support, right? So if they aren't with a mashpia coach, a rav, a rabbitzin, a therapist, a good friend, like if they're struggling to have these conversations and they feel stuck, that's when I would recommend that they reach out and try to get some support to have those conversations.
I think a lot of dating, just to have someone that you can reach out to, that you know that you can reach out to, like sort of before you get started. It's because sometimes the dating, like you're dating like 3 days in a row, which whatever, and then you kind of have to make a decision, and you only have like a day or two, so you can't start finding a coach at that point, or start finding a mashpia. Have that relationship sort of set up before, so that you have phone numbers to be able to reach out.
And they ideally know who you are and what you're looking for and what's important to you before.
And your hashkafa also, like the whole thing.
Yeah.
So someone actually asked a question that we were just suggesting that to make the dating less scripted. And so if it's sort of like it's scripted because it's kind of the cultural norms or the community norms.
Yeah.
And if we're going to throw it off, is that going to be saying something?
It's definitely going to be saying something. That might not be a bad thing, but it might be saying you're a nonconformist. It might be saying a lot of things. It's definitely saying something. So I think You want to be aware in general. Awareness is really important. So if you're coming from a community where, the man always plans the date and date one comes and he shows up and he's like, okay, we're going to go here and here. And then the woman says, actually, I was thinking we were going to do X, Y, Z. Yeah, that would be like sharing a lot of information you might not want to be sharing. And I think just because something is done doesn't mean it's what works for you individually or for we, like you, the couple. And I would have a conversation, maybe not on the first or second date, but once you feel like you know the person a little bit, I would say, what do you think about me planning a date? I mean, maybe they would be surprised by that. Hopefully they would say, I never thought about that. Like, what makes you want to do that? And that would be an example of a conversation about the relationship. And maybe they share because they really like hiking and they want to show them this cool mountain. Maybe they share because they want to have an active part in this. It is information. I don't know that it would throw someone off, but it would be information. I just think, to me, it's positive information or neutral information. But yes, we cannot take away the fact that you're doing something that's unconventional. I just personally don't think unconventional is bad. And I think being able to have conversations around it, this is a great conversation starter about what you as a person want, rather than you as this person following community standards want. So I think it's a cool springboard for a great conversation.
And so it is a little bit, if you're going against convention, it is a little bit risky. But if you're willing to do that, that means you're willing to take some sort of risk. He or she may not respond in the way you wanted, but that's information.
Exactly. If you're exactly. Sorry.
If someone's very black and white, then you want to know that also.
Right.
Especially if you're the type who's would want to do things colorfully or whatever the opposite of black and white is. But the idea of just doing it your way, and it's again halachically okay. I'm not talking about anything like that, but doing it your way or just doing it because you want to go hiking. I mean, I think hiking and nature there's a whole other part of the conversation of nature just kind of makes people relax, and you can have some better conversations. Again, hiking would be, walking side by side, so that could have that aspect that we spoke about earlier. So there is something about hiking, maybe not hiking in the winter in New York, but it's getting warmer soon. And so we could have such great conversations. So if you got something you would like to do and you know yourself that you like the hiking, or you know that it relaxes you, or you'd like to show one of your favorite spots in the, and that's who you are, then go for that and see if he can handle it or he doesn't want, then you want to know that too.
Exactly.
So we've been speaking for about an hour and we have so much more that we could go to. And have anything like final thoughts or something that you'd really want to kind of wrap it up in any one way?
I think that what we talked about is really looking at dating a little bit more closely and using dating as a tool to build a relationship rather than as a means to an end. Really paying attention to what's going on for you when you share, when the other person shares, different dynamics, trying to be as clear-headed as possible in the process. And if things aren't working for you within the system, is there a way that you can gently and appropriately bring it up and maybe shift a little bit so that it works better for you?
So this has been great. How can people reach you if they want to reach out for relationship therapy or any therapy that you do?
They can Google my name, Psychology Today would come up. They can call me at 347-946-0981 or email me at dr.a Margolis, Margolis @gmail.com.
And we'll also have that in the show notes so that people can find that. And you can reach us at Adai Ad at adaiad.org. I do dating coaching if you want to talk about that. We also have these cards. I didn't show them to you. These dating cards.
Okay.
Called convos, which we start to start conversations. And I think that they were actually done together with a few coaches, shadchanim, and some therapists. So they're really good questions to really make sure that we cover what we ought to be covering. And there's a whole segment. The whole idea is to develop the relationship. The information that's shared in these cards or that can come is less important than the hows of the conversation. And so that's why I love those cards. So I bring it up in our conversation about relationships. So thank you so much. This has been a great conversation, and good night, everybody.